This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm joined today by three folks I haven't seen in quite some time. The Speck brothers, Daniel, Paul, and Matthew. How are you today, gentlemen?
Excellent. Very good, thanks.
Excellent. So today we're going to be tasting a wine that's very special for you boys at Henry of Pelham. This is the Cuvée Catharine Brut. Now, in which vintage did you release this? When did you first start the sparkling program?
So we were starting to stop. This the current program started in 1999. So the first release wasn't until I believe 2000, 36, no, closer to 04. 2003 or 2004. Yeah. So it's all the wine. It's not vintage dated. This current one. We started the first harvest of grapes for this for the program would have been the 1999 vintage, and that first bottling would have been in 2000, and then released 2 years later. And that would have been all one from the 99 vintage. And then over time, we built up a non-vintage program. So we keep some stocks of wine back from earlier vintages and a traditional non-vintage sparkling wine program. But the very first harvest would have been the 1999 grapes.
Now, you weren't the first winery in Niagara to dabble in the sparkling side of things, but when did you realize the potential for sparkling wine in Niagara?
We actually, with method traditional wines, we actually started experimenting with it in 1992. And we were doing small batches all the way along. Because we realized from a climatic standpoint that Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, which were well planted by that point or being planted at that point, were perfect. We're very consistent in the vineyards year after year for sparkling wine, but also for table wine. So we started doing that experimentation rate almost at the beginning. I mean, our first vintage was 88, but by 92, we were playing around with method traditional, and it took us a few years. It's a tricky wine to make if you've never done it before, which we hadn't. And we got some help from we actually shared a consultant from Epernay back in the day, and he came to Niagara, and he was amazed and excited by the viticulture and the potential. And so there's that sort of, I'd call it a 5-6 year learning curve before we actually got going.
Now, this wine here, you've just had some rather exciting news about this one. Would you mind sharing that with our audience? This news is embargoed until December the 7th, but some good news for the Speck brothers for sure.
Yeah, so through our, we sell this wine as several wines you see here today, actually down in the States as well. And so with that exposure, it gives us access to some of the American publications, and Wine Enthusiast has recently picked this sparkling Brut as one of its top 100 wines for 2023, which is great because they taste something like 27,000 wines, and they're tasting the best from all around the world. And it's an honor. I mean, it's, I think, one of the highest honors we've had, thank you, as a company.
Yeah. And describe this wine for me. I've tasted this many times over the years, and the consistency is getting more and more spot on every single vintage or non-vintage, as the case may be. But it's really quite something. I remember my first taste of this wine way back in the day, and being rather impressed with the definition on it. I really enjoyed, I mean, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed Trias, which was all over the place at that point. But this had a very particular definition to it, which I think still continues to this day.
And I think for us, one of the real impetuses of getting into this program was how do we harness the natural acidity that we get, our terroir, our climate provides us with these grapes. And because the acidity is what's so essential to making good traditional method sparkling wine. You need to have grapes that retain their natural acidity, but still get physiologically ripe. And there's just not many places in the world where grapes will grow and do those two things together. And I mean, it's and making sparkling wine is trying to threading that needle on getting grapes to that point of physiological ripeness, where you're getting the flavor development, the nice apple fruit, but retaining that acidity that's going to keep the wine crisp and linear and allow it to age for years and years, as it's going to need to at the bottle.
What kind of longevity does one of these non-vintage Cuvée Catharines have?
The post disgorging?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, years for sure. It's kind of a question. I don't know.
I think I'm kind of young, right?
It's such a personal thing. Like my palates, I taste young, fresh wines at a tank all the time. But my palate is very tuned to fresh wine, right? So, but yeah, I mean, 3 to 5 years, this wine, no problem. And for me, for a palate, I really like crisp wines. Still, delicious.
I don't know my age, and then you get more of that oxidative note on it, which some people love and some people don't like. That so personal preference.
It's definitely it's not for everyone. People like to say they enjoy it, but when you start getting that really kind of oxidized, a lot more kind of autolytic thing coming out as well. Speaking of autolysis, how long does this spend on lease?
Yeah, the program has moved. We with the Brut, we've settled 24 to 30 months. I mean, there's a start and an end, right? But so we like to be 24 to 30 months range.
Now, I was talking about consistency here, but how have you seen this wine evolve since the very first vintage or the first release?
I mean, I think as I was saying at the beginning, one of the bigger differences is even though it's never been vintage dated, it really started its life as a vintage program. We made it vintage. It's in more, especially in the past half a dozen years or so, we've been using more blending of cross vintages to maintain the consistency. And I mean, the flexibility in this program to be able to do that is terrific, especially in a climate like ours, because we always get, I mean, there's no season in Niagara that we don't produce grapes with great acidity, especially when we're harvesting at this early stages. But we do have vintages where the ripeness of the fruit can rush along sometimes a little sooner than we want. So we may be getting into picking. At times, we've picked as early as late August, starting with this program, at least with the Pinot Noir component. And then there's years where we can let the grapes hang well into September. We're still picking for the sparkling program. So, and each of those vintages does have a benefit and a drawback. There's the pluses and minuses to each of those sort of harvest and ripening curves. So, blending across vintages and using that, utilizing that ability to blend across vintages is something we've done more and more. That's
I know this changes with every release, but with this current release, what is the percentage of reserve wine that goes in there approximately?
This one here is going to be a fair bit. It's probably 30-40% range.
And in all your years with this this particular wine, you must have done so many winemakers dinners, events, tastings, and the like. What are the best pairings that you've seen with this particular wine over the years?
Great question. So it's so versatile, right? Sparkling wines, because they have acidity, they can cut through so many different dishes. And I tend to be kind of classic with that. I like it with things that are anything I squeeze a lemon over as a general rule of thumb. So I mean, it's cliche to say, but like oysters and sushi and things like that, I think are so perfect with it. But even fattier things you got like pork belly, cooked the right way can be kind of interesting. Not too strong a sauce maybe, but or anything that's got a bit of lemon in it, or lemon curd. It kind of, for me, those are the things that I kind of like. But I tend to be fairly traditional with that.
It's a very, I had forgotten how clean it is as a sparkling. There's some wonderful appley fruit on here. There is some citrus. The autolytic character is quite reserved. It's not going to scare the horses here, but it's definitely there is that kind of toastiness going on. Really quite delightful. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, tasting through this particular Cuvée Catharine. It's always been one of my kind of favored sparklings to go for, Ontario sparklers, and it's tasting wonderfully today. Thank you very much, gentlemen.